The Maeslantkering is a storm surge barrier on the imaginary dividing line between the Nieuwe waterway located at Hoek van Holland and the river the Schur located along the cities of Maas, Loos and Vlaardingen up to the confluence of the rivers Oude Maas and Nieuwe Maas. Netherlands, 51 degrees 57 minutes 18.98 seconds north, 4 degrees 09, 49.63 E, 51.95 52722 degrees north, 4.1637861 degrees east, 51.9552722, 4.1637861, which automatically closes when needed. It is part of the DeltaWorks and it is one of the largest moving structures on Earth, rivaling the Green Bank telescope in the USA and the Bagger 288 excavator in Germany. The Maeslantkering barrier. The initial plan, the construction of the Maeslantkering, was a part of the Attribution project, which, in turn, was the final stage of the DeltaWorks. The main objective of this Attribution project was improving the safety against flooding of the Rotterdam harbour, of which the Europort is an important part, and the surrounding towns and agricultural areas. This had to be carried out by the reinforcement of existing dikes as far as 50 kilometers inland. During the 1980s it became clear that this project would take at least 30 years and would cost a huge amount of money. It would also mean that historic town centers, sometimes built more than 4 centuries ago, had to be broken down and rebuilt behind renewed, larger dikes. Therefore, the initial plan was put aside and the Ministry of Waterways and Public Works organized a competition in which construction companies could make plans for the construction of a reliable yet relatively cheap storm surge barrier. This storm surge barrier had to be located in the waterway that connects Rotterdam with the North Sea. This played an important role in the planning stage of the construction, as this waterway is the main route to the port of Rotterdam, at that time the world's largest port. Therefore, a barrier like the Dutch Oosterscheldekering and the Thames barrier could not be constructed, as such a barrier would block the shipping route. The winning plan called for 2 large floating gates on both dikes of the waterway. A major advantage of this plan was that construction of the storm surge barrier could take place under dry conditions, in dry docks. Other advantages were that no vital parts of the barrier had to be placed underwater, and maintenance of the barrier would be easy because of the dry docks. Finally, there would be almost no inconvenience for passing ships. The winning plan was put forward by the BMK consortium. This consortium included the contractors HBG, Volkswagen and Hollandia Kloos. The storm surge barrier project was one of the first large design and construct projects for which the contractor also prepares the design. Construction of the barrier. The construction of the barrier started in 1991. First, the dry docks were constructed on both shores and a sill was constructed at the bottom of the Nieuwe waterway. Then the 222-meter high and 210-meter long steel gates were built. After this, 237-meter long steel trusses were welded to the gates. Standing upright, these arms would be as high as the Eiffel Tower, and each one weighs almost as much at 6,800 tons. The main purpose of the arms is transmitting the immense forces exerted on the gates while closed, to one single joint at the rear of each gate. During the closing or opening process, this ball-shaped joint gives the gate the opportunity to move freely under the influences of water, wind and waves. It acts like a ball and socket joint, such as in the human shoulder or hip. The joints were made in the Czech Republic at DeltaWorks. The ball-shaped joint is the largest in the world, with a diameter of 10 meters, and weighing 680 tons. The construction of the barrier cost €450 million. The total Attribution project had cost €660 million. A working 1 to 250 scale version of the barrier was constructed in the Madurodam miniature village. Its construction took 6 months. It took 6 years to construct the real barrier. For more detailed information and information about water management in the Netherlands, people can visit the Information Center, which is open every day. Maeslantkering in operation on May 10, 1997. After 6 years of construction, Queen Beatrix opened the Maeslantkering. The barrier is connected to a computer system which is linked to weather and sea level data. Under normal weather conditions, the two doors themselves are well protected in the dry docks, and a 360-meter wide gap in the waterway gives ships enough space to pass without any inconvenience. But when a storm surge of 3 meters above normal sea level is anticipated in Rotterdam, the barrier will be closed automatically. 4 hours before the actual closing procedure begins, incoming and outgoing ships are warned. 2 hours before closing, the traffic at the Nieuwe waterway comes to a standstill. 30 minutes before closing, the dry docks that contain the gates are flooded. After this, the gates start to float and two so-called locomobiles move the gates towards each other. When the gap between the gates is about 1.5 meter wide, water is let inside the hollows of the gates, so that they submerge to the bottom of the waterway. The bottom has been elaborately dug and then laid with layers of broken stone, so that the gates are able to form a relatively watertight fit when submerged. In cases where the gates have to be shut for a prolonged period, which would cause the waters of the Rhine to rise behind them, the gate hollows are partly emptied and floated, so that excess river water runs out to sea, before they are submerged again. The decision-making algorithm that sequences storm surge-triggered events in the Maeslantkering is run entirely by computer. The Maeslantkering is expected to be closed once every 10 years due to a storm surge. With the rise in sea levels, the storm surge barrier will need to close more frequently in 50 years' time, namely once every 5 years. In its first 10 years of operation, the barrier was never closed due to a storm. There was one incident when a storm surge of 3 meters was predicted and the protective sequence was commenced. However, during the course of the storm, predictions were revised to a 2.99 meters surge and the computer cancelled closure. Eventually, the surge passed harmlessly and the waterway remained open. During the evening of November 8, 2007, the barrier was closed due to a storm surge for the first time. The barrier is closed for testing once a year, usually in the end of September or the beginning of October. Just before the beginning of the storm season mid-October, activities are held during the closing for the visiting public. The Information Center publishes information about the closing time and activities on its website. The Kalan Canal, located just south of the Nieuwe waterway and the Schouw visible in some images on this page, is protected by the much smaller Hartelkering storm surge barrier. This barrier is constructed some 5 kilometers further inland. The software that drives it is written in C++ and consists of 200,000 lines of code for the operational system and 250,000 lines of code for the simulation systems. The barrier is designed to withstand a storm that has an occurrence of only 1/10,000th per year. The 8th of November 2007 storm in order to test the barrier in actual stormy conditions. The water level threshold at which the barrier will start the closing procedure had been lowered from 3.0 meters over NAP to 2.6 meters. For the duration of the 2007 storm season. On the 8th of November 2007, a storm from the northwest hit the Dutch coast. A storm surge, high enough to start the barrier's closing procedure, occurred. The barrier was closed due to a storm surge for the first time since its construction. As the Eszter and Hartelkering storm surge barriers were also closed, the entire Dutch coast was protected against flooding for the first time since 1976. At 2200 local time, Dutch TV brought the news that maritime traffic on the Nieuwe waterway was shut off. The closing procedure of the Maeslantkering started at 23.10 h.
The barrier was completely closed at 100h and was reopened on 9 November around 17:00h. In popular culture, the barrier was featured on the US television program Extreme Engineering. The barrier was also featured on the History Channel television program Modern Marvels during Lovey's Education Gallery.